Okay, good. So I'd like to thank Cindy and Bill for inviting us. I'm really very impressed by the turnout here and the enthusiasm, and I think you guys are in for a very good meeting. What Cindy's asked us to talk about is the commitment of the NIH to research in liver disease, pediatric liver disease, and most specifically in Alagille syndrome. And what I've got here is evidence that the NIH has been interested in Alagille syndrome for a very long time, certainly almost from the beginning of the genetic era. And this is one of the papers that David had mentioned, published in Nature Genetics in 1997, where the JAGD1 gene association with Alagille syndrome was first recognized, and the corresponding author here is a guy named Francis Collins, who subsequently went on to coordinate the Human Genome Project and is currently my big boss as the director of the NIH. The NIH, which is the National Institutes with an S of Health, is really made up of 27 different institutes and centers, 21 institutes, and they're listed here. And you probably can't see these very well from beyond the middle of the room. But each of these institutes has a particular interest or organ or disease specificity. National Cancer Institute, the Eye Institute, Heart, Lung, Blood, et cetera, down the line. I and Ed work in the NIDDK, which is the National Institute for Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Diseases, and we also throw in some hematology as well, but they don't make it into the initials. The NIDDK is involved in a number of areas. We're involved to a large extent in basic research. A lot of the research that Dr. Piccoli discussed is funded by the NIH, as well as other funding organizations, private groups, other international foundations. But the NIH is a very major player and funder of research in this country. We're involved in performing and participating in large clinical studies and clinical trials. We have programs, program grants, such as the one at CHOP. We have research core centers, which basically provide a service, say genetics or something like that, for a large group of research programs. We have infrastructure, including, very importantly, a repository where samples are kept and can subsequently be tested or used in gene discovery or various other endeavors. We're very heavily involved in research training and in career development. We do scientific workshops. We do strategic planning. We're advisory to a number of other federal agencies. And we're also very involved in public education through our website and other areas. The repository, as I mentioned, is a huge warehouse of both samples and data, which can be accessed by any researcher with a legitimate research interest, and can provide invaluable samples and the data to correlate with it to facilitate many important discoveries. And this is really one of the greatest benefits that we provide through our funding of networks such as Children, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. We really do have a cradle-to-grave support for academic research, from the medical student and even pre-medical student level to postgraduate training, postdoctoral training, junior faculty, and then funding of senior investigators through a whole variety of projects here, or through a whole variety of programs. Obviously, it's important that we maintain the junior parts of this so that we have people that are going to continue to do important research going forward. Unfortunately, this is reality, and the blue bars are absolute dollars, and the orange bars are dollars adjusted to 1998. And what you can see here is that the NIH budget has actually been decreasing. There's a minor increase in the last year, but in real terms of spending, there's been a huge decline in the power of the NIH research dollar over the last decade or so. And this is a challenge that we have to deal with. And unfortunately, there are many things that we would like to do that we just don't have the fiscal resources to do. So we're very interested in gaining efficiencies, some of which we can do through networks. But sometimes we have to make very difficult decisions to fund one project and not another. There are a large number of areas that can impact cholestatic liver diseases. We've heard a lot about the genetics, certainly the biology of cells, regeneration of regenerative medicine, and a whole host of other things. All have potential impact in cholestatic liver disease, and all of these things are worthy of study and to a greater or lesser extent make up parts of our research portfolio. The challenge, and David alluded to this, is that many of the childhood liver diseases, including Alagille syndrome, are exceedingly rare. And it is difficult, if not impossible, to do meaningful research at single centers because you just don't have the volume of patients, nor do you have necessarily the critical mass of investigators to really move the field ahead. So this was recognized in the early part of the century, and it was felt that it would be appropriate to develop a network to really try to make progress in many of these childhood diseases. As I don't have to tell this group, but the cholestatic diseases tend to be rare. They have huge impacts on individuals and families. They are leading indications for liver transplantation, which is generally something that we prefer to avoid. And the therapies for these diseases, certainly in 2001, were virtually non-existent. So in June of 2001, we published, I wasn't there, but something called a request for applications. Basically, a funding announcement went out to the research community, and applications were reviewed through our peer review process, and 9 clinical pediatric transplant sites and a data coordinating center were funded to do research primarily in biliary atresia, but also to some lesser extent in other cholestatic diseases. And this was initially funded through the NIDDK as well as the NIH Office of Rare Diseases. Around the same time, another consortium was funded, which was called CLIC, the Cholestatic Liver Disease Consortium. These conveniently involved the same sites as BARC. The funding sites were the same. The funding sources were the same, and they were included as part of something called the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, which continues to exist. And in 2009, Bark and Click got together and had children. In 2009, the network was renewed then as the Childhood Liver Disease Research and Education Network, and has been funded continually since then, and was just recompeted in the past few months. And we have funding secured that'll get us now through 2019. Despite the decrease in the overall NIH budget, we've actually been able to maintain our funding, and there's $6.5 million a year of NIH money that goes into that. Additionally, we have a large number of additional foundations and patient advocacy groups which participate in children, some of which also make monetary contributions. There are, going forward, 12 clinical sites and a data coordinating center at the University of Michigan, and these are the sites involved in children. We have reasonable coverage across the geography of the U.S. And really, it's despite the fact that we're spread out, we all talk to each other on a weekly basis. We meet 3 or 4 times a year in person. There are a large number of subcommittees involving all of the networks, and it's an extremely collaborative and very productive group. The diseases that the Children Network studies include biliary atresia, Alagille syndrome, neonatal hepatitis, bile acid synthesis defects, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, mitochondrial diseases, other cholestatic diseases that are more rare, and the effects of cystic fibrosis on the liver as well. And the main study that involves patients and families with Alagille syndrome is LOGIC, which is the longitudinal study of genetic causes of intrahepatic cholestasis. This study, this is a database where I'm sure many of your kids are enrolled in LOGIC through the Children Network. But the diseases that are studied and followed are Alagille syndrome, alpha-1 antitrypsin, progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, and benign recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis. But these two, alpha-1 antitrypsin and Alagille, make up the large majority of patients in the network. It has been enrolling since 2007, and this number is actually not current. It's a little bit higher than that, but there are over 850 subjects enrolled, over 265 of whom have Alagille syndrome. And among the things that are being studied are the genetics through collaborations with Dr. Spinner, who was mentioned, and others, natural history, the bone disease, bone density, and pathology of these various diseases. Children has been very productive and very successful as a network. There are 37 full manuscripts that have been published by the network. There are quite a few more that are in various stages of preparation, and both at the American and the international liver meetings, the vast majority or a substantial part of the research that is presented in these diseases comes from the Children Network, particularly clinical studies. There have been a large number of ancillary studies, so these are studies that are not central to the network, but these are proposals that individuals either within the network or outside the network make to use the resources of the network to kind of further the research productivity. And there are a number of ancillary studies that are ongoing, and at least 2 of which are related to Alagille disease or Alagille syndrome. What the network has accomplished is that it's defined many of these diseases, their outcomes, their natural history, in a way where there are enough patients and enough power to really be able to make very solid conclusions as to what actually happens in these diseases, and be able to give families and patients reasonable predictions of what to expect upon diagnosis. We have a huge repository of tissues and DNA that's available to the network and to people outside the network. The key to the network, the key to all of our collaborative networks is really the collaboration, the fact that you have teams of really the leading scientists, leading physicians in these areas working together, trading ideas with each other, using the expertise and the technical ability and labs of each other to really do far, far more than any individual could do on their own with their own limited number of patients. And we also provide a platform and an infrastructure for clinical trials. Major trial in biliary atresia was just published, but we're about to embark in our first clinical trials in Alagille syndrome, and some of you may have heard of this. The ITCH trial is looking at the use of a bile acid reuptake inhibitor in reducing itching in Alagille syndrome, and I think that's something that will be of tremendous value to the community if it turns out to be fruitful and successful. And then there's an extension study, and this is being done through a public-private partnership along with a pharmaceutical partner, Lumina, which is now part of a bigger company called Shire. And I believe that Sierra Kennedy is going to be here tomorrow to discuss that, and she's the Vice President of Cholestatic Diseases for Shire. Just like to finish by thanking all of the centers and participants in the network, the clinical sites, the primary investigators, the co-investigators, the study coordinators, often nurses, who are invaluable in doing this and really are the interface between you and the network, surgeons, pathologists, and all who were involved in the Children Network, the Data Coordinating Center at the University of Michigan, and the people on our team at the NIDDK who do a lot of the work and a lot of the coordination, especially Becky Torrance and Sherry Brown, who are clinical trial specialists and are very important in administering the network. We have a technology transfer lawyer who is very important in facilitating these interactions with various industry partners, pharmaceutical, diagnostic firms. Catherine Carr, who's our regulatory specialist that does all the grunt work that allows the clinical trials to take place. And my bosses, Jay Hufnagel, who heads the liver disease research branch, Steve James, who is the director of the digestive diseases and nutrition branch, and Griff Rogers, who is the director of NIDDK. And it's really these people that make the decisions that allow us to fund networks such as Children. And very importantly, the contribution of patient advocacy and support groups. Cindy, as an example, is actually on our patient advocacy group subcommittee that meets regularly and advises the network. Additionally, Cindy has recently been named to the advisory council of NIDDK. So, she, as well as doing all she does for you, does a lot to help us as well. And most importantly, I want to thank the families and the children who participate in our trials, and really without you, we're nothing. So that's all I have to say. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, have a great weekend.